Stop motion is absolutely amazing. I'll tell you what I think. So this is going to be a video on why stop motion should never die. Recently, I went to see Coraline in the cinema because of its 15th anniversary and the special showings for the 15th anniversary, and it was basically a dream come true. It's one of my favourite films of all time, and I've seen it so many times, just not on the big cinema screen, so that was cool. It really did remind me of how much I respect, appreciate, and most of all, love stop motion. I remember stumbling upon Coraline on a TV channel at some point when I was younger, and being immediately enthralled by the style, the details, and the fact that it was all stop motion. Before this, I'd mainly seen those older stop motion shows like Postman Pat, Fireman Sam, Paddington Bear, Pingu, Wallace and Gromit. You know, those were still amazing and fun and interesting, but Coraline shocked me fully because it was a full 1.5 hours of this extremely intricate, most detailed looking stop motion I'd ever seen, and looking smoother than anything I'd ever seen before too. The scale of it blew my mind, and I loved the darkness to it too. Like, I'm not a gore or jump scare fan when it comes to horror, but I love psychological horror or creepy horror, creepy fairy tales and stuff like that. And Coraline was and still is right up my alley, and the stop motion added so much. Like, Coraline would really not be the same in 3D in my opinion. So, if you don't know exactly, stop motion is a technique where objects are moved in teeny increments and then photographed. All the frames then put and played together will thus make the objects exhibit this independent motion. Trivia, such fun. Coraline took a total of 4 years to make, and principled photography took 18 months. There was a total of 35 animators, and each animator completed 2.22 to 6.52 seconds of footage per week. It also took 10 people 3 to 4 months to create a single Coraline puppet. If you don't think that's impressive, then you must be hard to please. That is really the overarching theme when it comes to stop motion. It takes a lot of frame-by-frame creative control. The amount of work and detail and precision that stop motion takes makes it such a unique and fascinating medium. Stop motion had reached a peak by the 1980s, and don't get me wrong, I love early 3D graphics, and I'm gonna make a video on that too, but stop motion feels so charming and special. It has a very real feeling to it because it's all made by hand, if you get what I mean. Like, you're making handmade elements and characters come to life. Stop motion has been around for over 100 years at this point, which is a very long time actually. I think people at the beginning were fascinated by the way they could stop and start their cameras and create this illusion, and it must have been so magical. Despite the fact that stop motion is still extremely magical in this way, I feel like the craft of it doesn't necessarily impress a general audience as much as it should in modern times, much like how we also don't really see traditional hand-drawn 2D animation on the big screen as much as we used to either. Stop motion and traditional 2D animation still has a place in this world, but they certainly have changed massively over time. CGI is improving and looking more realistic and detailed by the day, and I'm not denying that is also impressive. There are many amazing ways that CGI is being used in the industry, but I think that stop motion has this unique longevity, in my humble opinion, because of that handmade aspect. So, the ultimate question. Why is stop motion so amazing, yet why has it become a rarer sight to see? I wouldn't say it's completely dead or dying, but the future for it is a little unclear. I think the main reason is time. The amount of time that goes into making and preparation, the sets, the puppets, lots of little details. Being a stop motion animator requires a level of craftsmanship, focus, and the skill to visualize, and in hindsight it can be extremely tedious, but this is also why it's so special and rewarding. But this is why there is a limit to how many stop motion films can be released in a year. The truth is, stop motion in general doesn't really perform as well. The highest grossing stop motion film is Chicken Run, which got 227 million at the box office in the year 2000, but compare that to the top 12 computer animated films, which all made over 1 billion. It's almost like stop motion is this thing that feels like a cult classic. What I mean is, I think in a growing digital world, the essence of this handcrafted nature will still shine through. The strength of stop motion is the effort and the creativity put behind it, and it's not something easily forgettable, and whether you like it or not, I think stop motion has a certain look that sticks with you. You know, think about The Nightmare Before Christmas, and despite a subpar performance at the box office, it is still now a cult classic, and I've seen merchandise still all over the place in HMV and video game shops. From the book Cracking Animation, near the beginning it says, "We need to be profitable to continue to do what we love, but making money is not what interests or motivates us. It is certainly not why we make films." It continues on later pages. "A successful animator should have vision, patience, and a sustained belief in what they are making. And when it comes to stop motion, every single stage of movement is an experiment or an adventure." I love noticing when stop motion pops up in advertisements or music videos and short films on YouTube too. There are many stop motion shorts on YouTube with millions of views. There also aren't many people in this world doing this kind of job.
People like a bit of stop frame, but there's not much of it about. I mean, the skills base is very tiny. You know, there aren't many of us who do this. The people who do what I do, there's probably 5.
This also makes it hard for stop motion to become a bigger thing, because ultimately there is this importance on how many people are involved and interested in the process, because that keeps the craft itself alive. Me, as someone born in 1996 in the UK, I remember there being an abundance of stop motion children's TV when I was growing up, and maybe I am biased towards this animation technique and art because I grew up surrounded by so much of it, and I just really wanted to explore this feeling more for a while, and since I have a YouTube channel now, I thought, why not? And I've watched a lot of stop motion in the years I've been alive, but there's still so much that I haven't witnessed. Honestly, going through this list as well I found on IMDb, I've experienced way more shows than I originally thought, which is good. It gives me a lot to talk about. Also, a lot of them are British, which does make me happy and proud because, you know, I am from England itself, if you haven't noticed. For example, I remember Lavender Castle being very interesting. I saw this DVD for it in this random shop a long time ago, and because I knew I was a fan of stop motion at the time, I got it. The show only ran for 1 season, which is a huge shame because it has heaps of style and charm and fun, characters and stories. There is this spacey yet mystical fantasy feeling to it, and it has a very distinct nostalgic British feeling that can be attached to a lot of shows I watched back then. It teleports me right back to the 90s. So I thought I would try and watch and read, you know, some of the makings of and behind the scenes, and I just realised more and more that there are many different sides to stop motion and different things you can look into. I want to delve deeper into this and share it with you because I am just that nice. So first of all, we have puppets and sets, and I think the range of puppets and sets that we see in stop motion is something truly remarkable. Fantastic Mr. Fox, for example, had 120 unique sets and was said to be quite an undertaking to make everything from scratch, which I'm not surprised, but you know, I think the result that we see on screen is a huge accomplishment. Just the amount of detail is absolutely fascinating, and there was this huge focus on prop placement and direction. Apparently Wes Anderson himself liked to have this control, you know, over every single little prop.
He's a great one for prop direction, Wes. He's fanatical, I think, about prop placement. We can spend 24 hours placing small props on the edge of frames and making sure things have got the right design painted on them and things like that.
Fantastic Mr. Fox is probably in the second spot for me when it comes to stop motion movies, right under Coraline. I love Wes Anderson's directing, and I think the mixture of his distinctive style and the stop motion is amazing. Same with Isle of Dogs 2, which actually is probably in the third spot for me in my rankings. There are just so many ways you can animate, and I love seeing the experimentation and individualism that comes with it. And speaking of Isle of Dogs, the detail put into the puppets is out of this world. From the detail of each freckle to each hair strand.
297 freckles on each face. I've actually painted over 22,000 freckles on Tracy alone on this job.
It almost feels like there's this magical intimacy when you witness each single frame, knowing in your head that each one is pretty much fully handcrafted. And when you see a puppet up close, you see all those little details and how people have made something that's not alive seem alive is such a creative wonder.
They are geniuses, and to make the thing look like it's moving at all seems to me impossible. But to then make it perform perfect genius comedy is inspired.
As you have most likely seen or can guess, any kind of object can be animated, including paper cutouts or humans themselves. Puppets with movable joints or plasticine figures are most commonly used in the industry at the moment, and I think 3D printing is utilised as well. A lot of the time these puppets are built also around an armature, which is like a skeleton pretty much, and also wire can be put into fabric or clothing pieces. Resin, fabric, latex or foam are all often used on top of armatures too, so there's a whole world of materials basically. To be honest, a lot of puppets are bigger than I realise as well. Like it does make sense, but whenever I see a making of video I'm like, wow, that puppet is bigger in scale than I thought. Nowadays more thought is put behind characters' faces, such as how eyes and mouths are made and animated. It's very dynamic. I remember a lot of shows I watched growing up, the characters' faces hardly changed at all. There wasn't really any mouth movement or anything, but that did allow for some fantastic storytelling and emotion to be performed through a puppet's movement and the voices, and I love how far the stop motion world has developed when it comes to materials and experimentation. A film that personally stands out to me in this regard is Anomalisa. You can see this divide where the replacement pieces would go to animate mouth movements for talking and emotions, and yeah, 1,261 different faces were made for Anomalisa. And there's also this part where his face falls off. You can see what the puppet looks like underneath, and it's just so smart and almost like a different kind of fourth wall break. It's like it represents this strong sense of fragility that is also highly represented through this delicate life of a puppet itself. There truly is power in experimenting with a different medium when it comes to film and when it comes to a lot of creative ideas, really. And again, talking about utilising the puppets themselves, there's this short film called An Ostrich Told Me the World is Fake and I Think I Believe It. It's the most meta stop motion I've ever experienced. Just seeing the construction of the stop motion and this contrast between the chaotic time-lapse of the animation and the mundane, slow office life is genius. And also, no dogs or Italians allowed. I also highly recommend this along with pretty much the majority of stop motion because clearly I'm very much in love with it all. This film really proves that you can create something really thought-provoking and represent important people and experiences with animation. This film achieves so much and it tells a story perfectly in 70 minutes. Clearly there's so much love and care, and the way it was created just makes it so beautifully personal. And then we have a film like A Town Called Panic, which I actually watched recently and loved it. 1,500 plastic toys were used for filming, and I think using miniatures for stop motion is such a genius idea. It was the most fun animation I've seen in a while, to be honest. The movement is so cool, lighthearted, amusing. The film is an adaptation of a show called the same name, which had 20 episodes and was released back in 2002. On Wikipedia also it says, the animation is designed to appear crude as if done by a child. In brackets, the characters evoke the look of cheap toy figurines, and the events of the characters' daily lives are extremely surreal and slapstick. This also aired on Nickelodeon in the UK, and much of the characters and scenery were later recycled for the Cravendale milk adverts, and I remember those. I definitely remember those. Those were fun.
Milk! Milk!
It's just so creative and imaginative, and the design and humour fit so well together, it's crazy. But of course, we also have to look at older times because a lot of stop motion dates back to 60s, 70s, 80s, and those times stop motion was a bit simpler than what we witness today because of, you know, the lack of technology and resources. It's grown a lot. I found this making of Morph video from 1981 and it was really entertaining.
And when I arrived, Dave was doing something very odd indeed.
It's a little bit odd, yeah.
So if you'll just take the stopwatch, you can help me time.
I love that Mickey Mouse on the wall.
Like film studios everywhere, once you're inside, you're in another world.
Hello, can I come in?
What amazing camera trickery.
How long does it normally take you to make a morph from scratch?
Well, it takes me half an hour, I think, to get one done.
Not boasting or anything.
Where does the name morph come from?
It comes from the word metamorphosis, which means changing shape.
Oh, I love the delivery of the lines. I don't know if they were planned in advance or if that was natural, but...
The whole 16-second sequence took 2 hours to film. But you just can't rush animation if you're after a perfect result.
Wise words. Kitty! What a cute cat, though. Highlight of the whole video, to be honest. It really does make it even more impressive because there was no screen to really view what you were making. You kind of had to hope for the best. It just seems like it required way more concentration than my brain could ever handle. When it comes to clay, like what Morph is made from, animator Scott Darros says, you don't necessarily require fancy armatures or expensive materials because the clay itself can do most of the work. And clay has a very nostalgic look to me. It reminds me of playing with plasticine or Play-Doh in school or at home and rolling it out into a sausage shape and feeling like a creative master. Director Adam Elliott is certainly worth mentioning here with his works such as Mary and Max and the short film Harvey Crumpet. For Harvey Crumpet, production began in his garage and subsequently took place in 3 separate studios, moving 3 times in order to accommodate the growing size of the sets. They intentionally left fingerprints in the plasticine when manipulating the models to remind the audience that what they're seeing is tangible, tactile, and it's not generated through a computer. When it comes to Mary and Max, principal photography lasted over 57 weeks, using 133 separate sets, 212 puppets, and 475 miniature props, including a fully functioning Underwood typewriter which apparently took 9 weeks to design and build. I feel like it's hard not to appreciate the work that goes into it. As a creative person, I find that when someone can really focus and make something like that, it's just very, very inspiring. I think handcrafting stuff like this really should be kept alive and not replaced. There is something special in making something with your own hands. Did you hear that back in 2023 the modelling clay supplier used by Aardman Animation shut down? I was genuinely on the edge of my seat in shock, and I started gathering all the hope I could muster so that Aardman would be able to still make films out of clay, and yeah, they released a statement saying that they found a new supplier, so you know, panic was over. But I was watching some of Rex the Runt by Aardman because I briefly remembered the look of these dog characters when I probably saw it on TV growing up, and I love it. It's aimed more at adults and it just has this very British humour and nature, and the style is also pretty unique in its own way. And also Wallace from Wallace and Gromit shows up in the first episode and I absolutely freaked out. It's like an amazing cameo. It was amazing. Interestingly linked to Aardman, the staff for the show Oscar and Friends were trained by Aardman's animation director. The creator for Oscar and Friends had travelled to England and requested some help. Along with animator Norman Yeend from Australia, the team were able to make Oscar and Friends higher quality. And I think in the end, this joint usage of painted backgrounds and the stop motion is really unique and just very appealing, and I'm sad that more shows don't look like this. And just in general, I really like stop motion when it comes to children's programming. I think it's a perfect medium, which is why I'm a little bit sad that it seems to be chosen less. I talked a bit about British stop motion specifically in my childhood video a few months ago, but naturally, if you're from a different country, you may have a different experience with stop motion media. For example, Loki de Leo, which was mentioned in a comment on my childhood video. This is a stop-motion lion character featured in a series of 5-second bumps that played during ad breaks in the Netherlands. Apparently, this marvellous lion has reached iconic status over there. The Magic Roundabout originally comes from France. I personally watched the English version, but funnily enough, it actually has a completely different script. The narrator was Eric Thompson, indeed the father of Emma Thompson. He had deemed the original French story simplistic and dull, so instead of translating them, he just made up the narrative as he went along, and yeah, I still think the Magic Roundabout is extremely charming. The red and the blue is Italian, and clearly the animators were absolute masters of clay. Also made with clay is the series Plonsters, which is German, very fun. Clay Kids is a Spanish series, which I remember being on TV fairly late in the evening when I was a teen. I actually remember being really excited to just find a new claymation show on my television screen, and I remember liking the characters and the way the camera direction looked, and it was just a lot of fun to experience on TV like that. The Pinchcliffe Grand Prix is the most widely seen Norwegian film of all time. The most widely seen, not animated film, the most widely seen just Norwegian film of all time, which is insane and amazing, and I love that it's a stop motion film. We have Domo TV, a joint release between Japan and the US, and I personally believe in Domo supremacy. My school bag for years was literally Domo's face. I hope I found a picture and it's here somewhere. And the Czech Republic has a big history, and quite an important history, with animation in general, even as far to be labelled as animation pioneers. Jens Schwenkmeyer and Jiřinka? That second name, it's really hard to say, I'm very sorry. They are notable names anyway, with many famous influential works. And there's also a 2015 film called Little from the Fish Shop, and also the Pattern Mat series. Personally, I want to look into more Russian and Soviet animation in general, and the history there, and also how influential it has been. There was a lot of puppet usage, and many important and interesting animation produced over the years. We also have the US to thank for popular shows such as what is broadcast on Adult Swim, Moral Oral, which is hard to say, Robot Chicken, and Frankenhole. In general, I love the range of audiences film and animation are for. There is media out there for everyone, and it's the same with stop motion. It can look grotesque, creepy, and even ugly at times, and it can be extremely emotional and hard-hitting, and of course it can be cute and humorous and cheer you up on a bad day. Just because it's animation doesn't mean that it's any less effective at telling a story or making you have some sort of reaction, and sometimes it's even the best choice. Moving on, film is fascinating, really. We are not actually seeing a moving picture, but a series of still pictures, hence why we say 24, 30, 60 frames, i.e. pictures per second. It really is a kind of optical illusion, which actually has a name called persistence of vision. Our eyes are literally being deceived. Sounds ominous, really. Most animation is done at 24 or 30 frames per second, but there's also ones and twos. Shooting on ones means that the animator moves the object for every single picture. Shooting on twos means that you move the object and take 2 pictures. For example, Paranorman was 24 frames per second on ones, i.e. for each of the 24 pictures, a movement was made, which is why when shooting on ones, the animation is very smooth. You can use these keys on YouTube to go frame by frame in a video, and I was doing this with like Corpse Bride and Shaun the Sheep. So in Corpse Bride, every single time you move forward a frame, there's this movement for each press, whereas for Shaun the Sheep there is movement for every 2 presses. And yes, I know I'm just sitting here and playing videos frame by frame. At least it's interesting to me. Anyway, I really like it either way. I love the satisfying nature of a really smooth piece of stop frame animation, but it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth to have charm. Of course, personally really like the movement and style of Peter and the Wolf. So cameras are also very important, obviously. They need to capture the pictures. And I love seeing some of these older behind the scenes where cameras are humongous, and for example this Pingu video is insane because of the way that he films this with a huge camera and then proceeds to cut up the film reel old style and stick it back together with tape. When it comes to stop motion, I think this way of how they made it it's insanely impressive how a lot of the shows turned out. It's exactly what I thought of when I mentioned earlier about stop motion animators requiring this skill to visualize. There was no way to properly view the result ahead of time. For something like The Wind in the Willows, it was the same. In an interview, the question was asked, what was the process like to film? And they responded, it was terrifying to film because we couldn't tell what we were doing. There were no monitors to show us what we were filming. We just had the sets, puppets, and a 16mm Bolex camera, so we were working blind. You just moved the puppet, took the frame, and moved the puppet again. If you moved a puppet, you moved him, you couldn't go back. And I also like this part from the same interview. It's not about digital things. Your hand was the best recorder and the performance was created in your hands, not in post-production. What you did ended up on screen. It's also like the charm of Gumby, and I noticed in some episodes that you can actually spot some frames with hands in them, and I thought that was kind of cool. Like, it gives this sense of a handmade craft that also doesn't need to be perfect to be enjoyable. It makes you realise how difficult this really was. And when it comes to shooting stop motion, often more than one scene is being shot at once. With Pirates in an Adventure with Scientists, there were often 30 or more scenes being shot simultaneously. And so stop motion has come to be on such a bigger scale nowadays. It's great. It must require so much communication. And in the book, again, that I mentioned earlier, Cracking Animation, there's also this part on Chicken Run. It reads, when Chicken Run was going full pelt, we had 30 different units in the studio at the same time, each working on a different shot of the film. On any given day, there might be 15 different animators all animating one character. The bigger the film, the more there is to charge around and control. Stop motion on a big scale like this just feels like some sort of massive stage performance you're undertaking. You know, for The Nightmare Before Christmas, like, the size of the production was enormous. There was a crew of over 120 with 230 sets, lots of sound stages, 440,000 frames had been taken. There were 227 puppets constructed. Jack Skellington had 400 heads for each emotion, and as a little fact at the end, the figure of Jack Skellington was reused for James and the Giant Peach. And then there's the way that they had to figure out at some point how to make characters jump or fly or have just more dynamic movement, and it's just amazing that they figured it out. It's magical. Now this is done by rigging. Essentially you attach this like piece of equipment to the puppets and you can have them suspended in midair and you edit out the rig afterwards. For example, with Paranorman, the extent of the detail and the amount of work they did to hand make as many pieces as possible, and to have like the car flip over and the zombies coming out of the ground and having the zombies drool everywhere. Whether it's like a bigger action piece or the way that the scratches in the soil are made, you know, some effects as well, like using cotton wool for smoke or fighting scenes. Making all this stuff by hand makes it then look very distinctive. And I think if you look at any stop motion production, whether that be TV series, short film, advertisements, there must always be these challenges that the creators would have had to overcome. From my personal outside viewpoint, stop motion really looks like a consistent challenge, you know, something that can always be physically experimented with more and more and more. And I think if you follow stop motion, you have probably heard of Junkhead, a Japanese film, which is a very perfect representation of the importance of having passion. Absolutely everything at the beginning was done by one single person. In the end, for the film, I think he had a small team, but the fact that he made this film a reality by venturing into the world alone originally is just so inspiring. And I think this film now has this cult status and just shows that in the world of film and creativity, you can start out these journeys alone. Sometimes all you need is simple pencil and paper. Also made single-handedly over 13 years, Blood, Tea and Red String. I loved the design of this whole thing. Like, the puppets and sets are so cool, like you've been teleported to some hidden magical antique shop or something. It's very effective altogether. The stop motion animation suits the style perfectly. The creator, Christiane, has clearly created her own little world for us to experience, and it's beautiful, it's just art, and the passion comes through in buckets. And The Wolf House is another example of something truly spectacular and exceedingly clever, as an entire house was utilised for this. The craftsmanship is on another level and you probably have never seen anything like it. And I wanted to have a special section for stop motion in video games. Why? Because stop motion in video games is fairly rare, but when it does happen, it's just hard not to massively appreciate it and adore the artistry behind it. Creating a video game is a feat in itself, and doing stop motion too, and trying to like put that onto, it's insane. We have games such as The Neverhood, Skull Monkeys, and Army Croc. The Neverhood was the first stop-motion production to use consumer digital cameras for professional use. It was an extremely original and unique point-and-click puzzle game. Despite it not performing too well at all, it reached cult status. From what I could see, there were 2 or 3 tons of clay used. Skull Monkeys was the sequel, released in 1998, and Army Croc, released in 2015, is a spiritual successor. The Dream Machine is another game. It is built by hand using materials such as clay, cardboard, and broccoli? Lumino City is also made by hand and again looks really beautiful and cool. And there's also Tanita, a plasticine dream from 2006 about a small plasticine girl. We also have Troubadour, which I thoroughly enjoyed playing some years ago, and I think I just, I saw the trailer randomly and was just amazed at the time, and I really wanted to play it. Especially for something with a point and click setting, it just worked so well with the gameplay. From what I can read, it seems like the team really enjoyed making the miniatures. You can really feel that passion that's put behind it, so it's certainly something special, and I do believe it deserves more recognition. More recently, we have Harold Halibut, a game from this year developed by a German independent developer. Quote on the wiki page says, "The team were interested in the use of handmade assets and stop motion as they lacked experience in 3D modelling, preferring to leverage their skills of carpentry, sculpture, lighting and costume design to create a game." Which makes perfect sense. I don't blame them for doing that, and the result looks really cool and I can't wait to play it myself. For these kinds of games, you basically have to photograph the objects or puppets you make from all different angles and then digitize them and render them in 3D, a process called photogrammetry, and after this you can rig them. Amazing stuff, really. We also have Vocabulantis coming out, I think, in October 2024, so next month, as of this video. It looks extremely beautiful. Again, the word beautiful. To finish off, we have games based off stop motion creations, such as The Nightmare Before Christmas, of course, has a game on PS2 and GBA, very good for Halloween, or Christmas, I guess. Coraline has a game that I desperately want, but it is very expensive. Wallace and Gromit naturally has a few video games, along with Chicken Run and Shaun the Sheep. There's also a decent list of old British stop motion shows that have games too. The Norwegian film The Pinchcliffe Grand Prix has games too, one being a recreated version released in 2021. And finally, I also think there were some Pingu games. What a time to be alive. So there we have the world of stop motion. Why I love it so much, and why it should never die. In summary, I think stop motion is such a creative wonder that I would love to explore myself even, maybe next year. I actually almost did study stop motion in university, but it didn't quite work out, but this video has kind of sparked that motivation for me to finally give it that proper go, sometime in the near future. So please do let me know if there are any stop motion pieces of media that are your favourite, especially if I haven't mentioned them or shown them here anywhere. If you haven't seen much stop motion before, then please do pick out something and give it a try, because it really is something worth experiencing. Thank you as well to my patrons on Patreon. You are very, very, very appreciated. Always. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching. I will see you probably in the next video, especially if you've made it this far. Anyway, goodbye.